A delayed flight, impatient passengers, and a flight attendant they thought they could walk all over, until her secret changes everything. The sharp buzz of the airport intercom echoed through Gate B27 at Dallas Love Field Airport. The flight to San Diego had been delayed. Again. Frustration hung thick in the air as passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, muttering complaints about missed connections and wasted time. "Typical airline nonsense," one man grumbled, adjusting his baseball cap. A woman seated next to him chimed in, "I just don't understand why they can't get their act together. Don't they know our time is valuable?" The boarding announcement finally came, and passengers funneled toward the jet bridge, some muttering snide remarks as they passed the airline staff scanning boarding passes. The tension was palpable, but no one seemed more determined to keep things moving than the flight attendant standing at the cabin door, Michaela Green. Michaela, in her neatly pressed uniform and with a calm smile, greeted each passenger with a polite nod as they shuffled past her. Her voice was warm, her tone professional, yet the occasional dismissive glance from passengers didn't escape her notice. She'd seen it before. As the cabin filled, Michaela went to work, helping passengers with their oversized carry-ons and directing traffic down the narrow aisles. She moved efficiently, her sharp attention to detail keeping things from spiraling into chaos, but her composure seemed to bother a handful of passengers who were already irritable. "Why's she acting like she owns the place?" whispered a woman in the aisle seat of row 12, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her seatmate chuckled. "I don't know, but she's doing too much for someone who probably just started last week." Michaela heard the comment but didn't react. Years of dealing with similar remarks had taught her to let them roll off her shoulders. But it wasn't just her professionalism that kept her calm. There was a much bigger reason she could remain unshaken. The plane finally began taxiing to the runway after a 2-hour delay. The tension didn't subside. As Michaela prepared the cabin for takeoff, she overheard another passenger grumbling about the delay. "She's walking around like she's in charge, but where's the actual pilot? I'm starting to wonder if this is a real airline." Michaela's expression remained neutral, though her mind was racing. She had taken this flight not just as an employee, but to observe firsthand how her staff handled tough situations. The passengers had no idea she wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the CEO of the airline. But tensions were only starting to rise. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Michaela made her way down the aisle with the beverage cart. Most passengers accepted their drinks with little more than a grumble, but a few seemed intent on making her job harder. "Excuse me," a man in a crisp suit said, stopping her mid-pour. His voice was sharp and demanding. "Why did you run out of sparkling water? What kind of airline doesn't stock enough for all its passengers? Ridiculous." Michaela calmly responded, "I apologize, sir. I'll check with the galley to see if we have more." "You apologize?" he scoffed, leaning back in his seat with a smirk. "Apologies don't fix bad service." She nodded politely and moved on. Behind her, she caught snippets of laughter from the row. "Bet she got the job as some diversity hire," one passenger muttered under his breath. Michaela felt her stomach tighten, but her face betrayed nothing. Another woman in the middle of row 18 added, "Honestly, it's like they'll hire just anyone these days. Standards are clearly slipping." Michaela bit the inside of her cheek. Not because the words hurt. They didn't. She was used to these kinds of comments, but because she wanted to see how far this group would take things. Her goal for the flight had been simple: observe her team and the passenger experience. But now she was seeing something far uglier. The delay had left many passengers irritable, but instead of directing their frustration at the weather or the airline itself, they had chosen a different target: Michaela. It wasn't just their words either. The exaggerated eye rolls, the dismissive gestures when she offered help, the refusal to even look her in the eye. It all spoke volumes. Still, she carried on, determined to remain professional. One of her co-workers, an older flight attendant named Susan, approached her at the back of the plane. "You doing okay?" Susan asked softly. Michaela nodded. I'm fine. Just a tough crowd. Susan sighed. Tough doesn't even begin to cover it. I heard what that guy in 12C said. You know you don't have to put up with this, right? Michaela smiled faintly. I've handled worse. Let's just get through the flight. But things were about to escalate. As Michaela returned to the front of the cabin, she noticed a man standing near the restroom, blocking the aisle. He looked her up and down, then sneered. You're taking your time, huh? Figures. I'm sorry for the wait, Michaela said evenly, stepping aside to let him pass. He didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer and said, just loud enough for her to hear, You're lucky anyone even listens to you. If it were up to me, I'd have you cleaning the bathrooms, not running this plane. Michaela met his gaze. For a split second, she considered saying something, but she held her tongue. Not yet. The hostility was simmering, but what came next would push Michaela to her breaking point. The flight was barely halfway to San Diego when the situation in the cabin started spiraling further out of control. Michaela was making her second pass through the aisles when she noticed a commotion brewing in row 14. I don't understand why I can't get another drink, a man barked, waving his empty cup in the air like a flag. His voice was loud enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. I paid for this seat, didn't I? Sir, I'll gladly bring you another drink as soon as we're able, Michaela replied, keeping her voice calm. As soon as we're able? Are you kidding me? That's code for never, isn't it? His tone dripped with sarcasm, and a few passengers nearby chuckled. Michaela began to reply, but before she could, the woman sitting next to him decided to pile on. Honestly, the service on this flight has been abysmal, she said, shaking her head dramatically. And you're just, well, you're not exactly helping. Michaela paused. This wasn't just about the delay anymore. These passengers were making it personal. Still, she refused to let them get to her. I'll be back shortly, she said, her voice steady, before turning and walking away. But the murmurs behind her followed. She's got no idea what she's doing. Yeah, you can tell she's not experienced. Bet she doesn't even know how to handle a real emergency. Michaela moved toward the galley at the back of the plane, needing a moment to collect herself. She wasn't upset, but the disrespect she was witnessing, both toward her and the crew, was a lot to stomach. And yet, this was why she was here, to see things as they really were. Susan caught her in the galley again, concern etched across her face. Michaela, I heard that whole exchange. You don't have to keep taking this. I know, Michaela said, exhaling slowly, but I need to. Trust me. Before Susan could respond, the intercom crackled, and the captain's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered some unexpected turbulence ahead, so we'll need everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened for the next 20 minutes. Thank you for your cooperation. Michaela used the announcement as an opportunity to regain her composure. She knew the turbulence would only add to the passengers' frustrations, but she was ready for it. What she didn't expect, however, was how quickly things would escalate. The plane hit its first bump, a sudden drop that sent a few passengers gripping their armrests. The man in 14A, the same one who had been demanding another drink, immediately started shouting. What kind of airline can't even avoid turbulence? He yelled. This is unbelievable. Michaela returned to the cabin to ensure everyone was secure. As she passed row 14, the man shot her a glare. Do something about this. Sir, turbulence is a normal part of flying, she explained patiently. The captain is doing everything he can to make this as smooth as possible. Yeah, sure, he sneered. And I'm supposed to believe you're an expert now. Please. A few rows back, another passenger chimed in. Maybe if she spent less time playing boss and more time doing her actual job, we wouldn't be in this mess. Michaela stopped and turned slightly, her hands clasped in front of her. She wanted to say something, to shut them down right there, but she knew it wasn't the right time. Instead, she offered a polite, Thank you for your feedback," and continued down the aisle. But as she moved away, she could feel the stares, hear the muttered comments. It was clear they didn't respect her. What they didn't realize was that the power dynamics were about to shift in a way none of them could have expected. The flight finally landed in San Diego, the wheels touching down with a slight jolt. Passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts almost immediately, despite repeated announcements asking them to remain seated until the plane reached the gate. Michaela stood at the front of the cabin, watching the flurry of movement and hearing the impatient grumbles of passengers eager to get off the plane. Her hands rested at her sides, calm and composed, but inside, she was preparing for the moment she knew was coming. As the plane came to a full stop and the seatbelt sign dinged off, people surged into the aisle. Carry-ons were pulled down hastily, some hitting neighboring passengers in the process. Michaela stepped aside to give them space, standing near the cockpit door. One of the loudest passengers, the man from row 14, passed by her, dragging his suitcase. He didn't bother making eye contact but muttered under his breath, "Worst flight ever. You should be ashamed of yourself." Michaela didn't respond, but she followed him with her gaze as he disappeared down the jet bridge. The rest of the passengers filed out, some offering stiff smiles, while others avoided her entirely. A few had the decency to say thank you, but most didn't. Once the last passenger exited, Michaela took a deep breath. It was time. Minutes later, she walked into the gate area, where several passengers had congregated around the baggage carousel. Some were still complaining, others were on their phones, venting to whoever would listen. Michaela stepped into the middle of the crowd. She was still wearing her flight attendant uniform, but this time she carried a different energy, one of quiet authority. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and steady. The group turned to look at her, some with confused expressions, others with barely concealed irritation. "I just wanted to thank you all for flying with us today," Michaela continued. "I know this flight wasn't perfect. We had delays, turbulence, and a lot of frustrations along the way. But there's something I need to share with you before you leave." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. All eyes were on her now. "My name is Michaela Green, and I'm not just your flight attendant. I'm also the CEO of this airline." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and several people exchanged wide-eyed looks of disbelief. The man from row 14 froze mid-step, his jaw slack. One woman spoke up, her voice laced with incredulity. "Wait, you're the CEO of this airline?" "Yes," Michaela said with a small nod. "I started as a flight attendant years ago, and even as CEO, I make it a point to fly as part of the crew every so often. It helps me understand the experiences of both my employees and my passengers." The crowd was stunned into silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, clearly replaying their earlier behavior in their minds. Others looked embarrassed, their faces flushed with shame. The man from row 14 finally spoke, his tone defensive. "Well, if you're the CEO, maybe you should focus on fixing the delays instead of playing flight attendant." Michaela's eyes locked on him, her expression calm but firm. "Sir, delays are often caused by factors outside of our control, like weather or air traffic. But what we can control is how we treat each other, whether we choose to show respect or not. That's why I'm here, to see how people interact, especially under stress. And today, I saw a lot." The man shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing more. Michaela looked around at the group, her voice softening. "I understand that delays are frustrating, and I know this flight wasn't ideal. But respect should never be conditional. It shouldn't depend on how someone looks, what uniform they wear, or the role they play. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity." A few passengers nodded quietly, and one woman murmured, "She's right." Michaela continued, her tone steady. The next time you're frustrated with a situation, I hope you'll think twice before taking it out on someone who's just doing their job. And if today's experience made you uncomfortable, I hope it's a reminder to treat people better moving forward. The crowd remained silent, the weight of her words settling over them. But Michaela wasn't finished just yet. For a moment, no one spoke. The baggage carousel hummed softly in the background as passengers absorbed Michaela's words. Some stared at their shoes, unwilling to meet her gaze, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances, their earlier behavior replaying in their minds like a bad movie. The man from row 14 shifted awkwardly, his bravado from earlier completely gone. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The silence lingered until an older woman near the edge of the group broke it. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, stepping forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but her sincerity was unmistakable. I was one of those people who said things I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that, and I'm sorry." Michaela smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Another passenger spoke up, a younger man holding a toddler. "It's easy to forget that everyone has a story, you know. I was frustrated too, but you handled it better than I ever could. So, thanks for your patience." Michaela nodded. "I appreciate that. And I understand frustrations can get the better of us sometimes, but we all have a choice in how we handle them." One by one, a few more passengers offered quiet apologies or words of gratitude. Not everyone, of course. Some remained silent, their pride keeping them from admitting fault. But the mood had undeniably shifted. As the baggage carousel began to move, Michaela looked at the group one last time. "I didn't share my position to embarrass anyone or call anyone out," she said. "I shared it because I wanted to show you that assumptions can be dangerous. You never know someone's story or their role in the bigger picture." She paused, letting her words sink in. Today wasn't just about a flight delay. It was a chance to reflect on how we treat each other, especially when things don't go as planned. I hope you'll carry that with you. With that, Michaela stepped away, leaving the passengers to collect their luggage in silence. Later, as she walked through the terminal toward the exit, Michaela couldn't help but reflect on the day. It hadn't been easy, standing there and absorbing all that negativity, but it had been worth it. She'd seen the best and worst in people, and while the worst had been loud, the best had left her hopeful. As she reached the curb to catch her car, Susan, her fellow flight attendant, called out behind her, "Michaela!" Michaela turned to see Susan jogging toward her, a wide smile on her face. "I just wanted to say, that was incredible," Susan said. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. You've got guts." Michaela chuckled softly. "Thanks, Susan. It's not about guts, though. It's about setting an example. If we want people to change, we have to show them how." Susan nodded. "Well, you did that, and then some." As Michaela got into her car, she glanced at Susan one last time. "Take care of yourself, okay? And keep doing what you do. You're making a difference, even if they don't always see it." Susan smiled and waved as Michaela pulled away. Back in the terminal, the man from row 14 stood by the exit, his suitcase in hand. His face was still red with embarrassment. As the automatic doors opened and he stepped into the warm California air, he muttered to himself, "Guess I'll think twice next time." This story isn't just about what happened on a plane. It's about how we see and treat each other in everyday life. Respect doesn't cost anything, but it can change everything. Next time you find yourself in a frustrating situation, remember Michaela's words. You never know someone's story or the weight they're carrying. Choose kindness, no matter what. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder to treat others with respect. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to be better.